All right, so this is your video for Module 10. Pause right now if you haven't already done the warm-up. Review the information from our last module on fossil fuels. So then we're going to start with our notes on the carbon cycle. So we first had to learn about fossil fuels because they are a big part of the carbon cycle. All right, so copy the notes. Make a copy of Note 7, Carbon Cycle. And let's begin. So plants and animals, like us, we both breathe. We both produce energy, but we do it in opposite ways. It's kind of like yin and yang. So this video explains how breathing for plants and breathing for animals is sort of a similar but opposite chemical reaction, and they both use carbon. So pause and watch this video and focus on where do you see carbon, such as carbon dioxide and glucose. So glucose is a molecule with carbon in it. So how does carbon dioxide and glucose play into photosynthesis and cellular respiration, which is our breathing? All right, so why is carbon important? So carbon is considered the most important element for living things. 18% of us and 45% of plants are made up of just the element carbon. Every single cell and most of the molecules that make up our bodies contain carbon. So pretty much everything. Let's look at the ways we're going to see carbon in different forms in this diagram, in this cycle. So living things, now that we know that animals and plants both contain a large amount of carbon in every single one of their cells, if you see a living thing, you can think of it as a form of carbon. Fossil fuels are also even more than that, more carbon than that. They're like, 99% carbon or something. Very high in carbon. It's almost all of what it is. And then air and water also contain carbon dioxide gas. So yes, air contains a small amount of carbon, CO2, carbon dioxide, but even water, like ocean water, it doesn't have to be fizzy. It still contains carbon dioxide gas. All right, so here's how the carbon cycle works. First, carbon exists in the atmosphere, so we'll start there. It's in small amounts though, but it is in the atmosphere naturally. Plants absorb the carbon through photosynthesis. So it moves from the atmosphere to the biosphere. And then animals, of course, come along and eat those plants and obtain the carbon for their own body and their own use. So when living things die, trees or cows, they decompose and the carbon becomes part of the geosphere. So their bodies break down and their carbon moves into the soil. Over time, some of the carbon in the geosphere becomes fossil fuel. So if you think back to Module 9, that's how fossil fuels formed, is they were living things, they died, they were buried, and then they transformed into oil, coal, and natural gas. Carbon in the atmosphere, so if you switch over here, we have a different kind of its own cycle happening, but carbon in the atmosphere is absorbed into bodies of water like the ocean. So there's a constant exchange, it's a carbon exchange going on. The ocean just absorbs carbon through touching the air, and it also gives off carbon. And that could also be from the breathing of aquatic life. So soon we're going to talk about how we burn fossil fuels and return carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. But for now, we're just focused on what naturally happens without humans. Okay, so you have a little interactive carbon cycle simulation. So I'd like you to click on this link in the module and just kind of explore all the different ways that carbon moves around the Earth. And here are some questions that I'd like you to just think about. Where is carbon stored in the carbon cycle? So what are the carbon stores? Those would be the gray ones. So look at all those places where carbon is stored. And then the blue ones are the processes that move carbon. So these are ways that carbon moves from one gray store to the other. And then try and figure out what processes move carbon to the hydrosphere. So which arrows are pointing to the what would be considered the hydrosphere. And then what processes move carbon to the geosphere. And then what processes move carbon to the biosphere. So I want you to think about these because we're going to have test questions similar to these. So that is the end of Module 10.